Hello, everybody, and welcome back to AP Lit video and review. We're excited that you're with us for another day. It's going to be a good lesson. We're going to be talking about narrator, and speaker's perspective. So I'm Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia, Grady High School. Of course, my co-teacher right here with us, Bear's hanging out with us. He's excited for another lesson, even though I have to admit he tends to be one of those students who sleeps during class a lot, just saying. With me today is Mr. Escobar.
How are you guys? My name is Carlos Escobar. I'm from Miami, Florida, and I teach at Felix Varela Senior High School. We're very excited to be speaking with you guys again. And as we've mentioned before, right now we're talking about Unit 9. So we're looking at long fiction and drama as it pertains to the AP Lit exam. Yesterday's homework is how we're going to begin today. So let's begin with our warm-up.
So yesterday we looked at this prompt. What are novels and plays? They include scenes of weddings, funerals, parties, and other social occasions. Some scenes may reveal the values of characters and society in which they live. So your task is to select a novel or play that includes such a scene and, in a focused essay, discuss the contribution the scene makes to the meaning of the work as whole. And your job was to just think about a novel that included one of these scenes, and we're not asking you to write a full essay, but your teacher may have, so do what your teacher says. But we wanted you to just think of 2 or 3 claims about the significance of this scene, because we talk all about plot and how plot really can open up broader meanings within a work. So when I was thinking about this, and yesterday, I mean, immediately when this came up, I was thinking about, oh, Mudbound and As I Lay Dying and novels that start with a funeral. It's kind of weird. I go to the dark side when I'm reading. I like all of these dark works. So things that start with funerals are really of interest to me, which is weird probably. But the more I thought about it last night, I thought about some different works, like the importance of being earnest. And, you know, we have this occasion where they're having tea, and that really, that scene especially, it just like highlights some of the class conflicts and makes commentary about Victorian society. Or I thought about Hamlet, and when Hamlet and Laertes are in Ophelia's grave and they are fighting. What an interesting scene. Just really speaks to just some of the lies and deception and power control themes that are going on in Hamlet. I also thought about Brave New World, which is a favorite in our class, and the solidarity service. I mean, they're coming together, everybody, in this one almost mocking church service. And that service and what goes on in that service really speaks to the controlling ideas of freedom and conformity and just living in that contrast. So those were some of the things that came to my mind. Mr. Escobar has some books that he's used in his class. He's going to share those with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I want to bring something up, which is sometimes we work in isolation, right? Even within your department, sometimes when you're the AP teacher, you know, your issues, your concerns, your questions might be different from some of your colleagues. And sometimes you might be the only AP teacher in the whole school. And oftentimes you might feel very isolated. And it's great to come to forums where you see that there are people out there who are, you know, having the same struggles as you are, or getting excited about the same things. And I usually enjoy attending the AP annual conference, for example. That's when you recognize that you're not alone. And whenever AP English Lit teachers get together, the conversation undoubtedly turns to, so what novels and plays are you teaching, right? What's getting you excited and what's getting your kids excited? So it's been great to get emails from you guys, and the fact that this has become a forum where we come together and we discuss books. I heard from someone as far away as Bolivia, Santa Cruz Cooperative School in Bolivia, and they were sharing that this year they read Things Fall Apart, they read The Awakening, and they read heart of darkness. So it doesn't matter where you are. Y saludos a todos ustedes allá en Bolivia. Regardless of where you are in the world, when you're teaching this course, it's the literature, right? The richness of these texts that get Miss Barber excited, that get me excited, that get all of the teachers and students excited. So here's some possibilities. And I know some of you are keeping track of the works that we mentioned because they're works that you may want to pick up and read with your students. So I thought for this text, again, this prompt, if we go back 1 second, was about a critical scene, right? And we're not going to give the plot summary of that scene. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss the crux of that scene, the crucial aspect of that scene and how it connects to the central ideas of the text. So I thought about, and not because of the students in Santa Cruz, I had already thought of this, but I thought of Things Fall Apart. And I couldn't select a single scene here, one specific one, because there are so many scenes of where they gather to dance or where they gather to celebrate a marriage or agree upon a marriage, and there's just tons of critical scenes here that you can select from. I thought of The Women of Brewster Place. I think that you can tell that I'm a Gloria Naylor fan. Yesterday I spoke about Linden Hills, which I think is a novel that really targets our heads, our minds, and this one targets our hearts. I mean, this is it's a great one to read. And here I would focus on the block party, that scene that occurs, or maybe it doesn't occur, right? There, those of you who have read it know what I'm talking about. There's some doubt as to whether that scene even exists within the novel. But I would talk about what the significance of that scene is to the characters and to Miss Naylor's message for the novel as a whole. And of course, good old Pride and Prejudice, right? And then we're talking about that ball where Lizzie overhears Darcy talk about how she's tolerable, but not handsome enough. And for any person, right? But certainly for Lizzie, for a young woman to hear this man talk about you in that way, crushing, but yet so significant. And it's definitely something that we can connect to what Miss Austen is getting at. So these are some possibilities, but of course, these are just the glimpses, the moments in the plot, right? This is the what. What are the key text moments that I'm talking about? But then we got to talk about the why. Why does that marriage ceremony exist? Why does that ball exist? Why does that block party exist or not within the Women of Brewster Place? And then we connect it to the work as a whole. Why is it that Austen has that first encounter between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth be so painful, so hurtful? And what does that say about the way that different members of society treat each other, or the way that men and women treat each other? I mean, we can take it in so many directions, right? But these are the texts thought of, and Miss Barber gave you a bunch of the texts that she thought about. And today we're going to be pivoting, and we're going to be talking about something else. So maybe Miss Barber can introduce this to you guys.
Sure. So today we are going to be specifically looking at specific details, selection of details, diction, or syntax in a text that reveals the narrator's or the speaker's perspective. I get so excited. All of my graduate work is in syntax. So as soon as I see the word syntax, I'm like, woohoo. So this is going to be a great lesson. And this is, again, like we talked about yesterday, this is a way to go really at the word and the phrase level in a text in here, a long work of fiction, and take that and connect it to a broader context. The great thing about when we're able to go really small and specific like this is it lets us get deeper and further into our analysis. So the more specific we go, the deeper in our analysis we can go. So this is going to be a way in for you to really dive deep in your analysis. So what we really want to do is spend some time focusing on the narrator's perspective, and that's going to allow readers to recognize how their experience with and interpretations of the text might be impacted by the narrator. Again, we're at Unit 9 looking at the end of the course goals that we're working on. And so this is really high level thinking, critical thinking. So I love that y'all are doing this work. I mean, you're really proving yourself as critical readers when we're doing this.
Absolutely. And for listeners and viewers who are thinking, well, how can I apply this to the rest of the units of the course, or to the rest of the questions on the exam, right? Not just question 3. You're talking about narrator or speaker, right? So that can take you to any story, whether you're talking about short fiction or long fiction, and it can obviously take you to the poetry itself. So again, even though we're focusing on Unit 9, this material is applicable to the entire course. And to practice and to see how this functions, we're going to use the turn of the screw. We're going to use Henry James. So we're going to stay in this scary mode, I guess. We started with Frankenstein, and then we talked about the suspense in Ibsen's A Doll's House. Even though that's not a scary play per se, it's certainly suspenseful. But this one is a scary one. All right. So Turn of the Screw, published in 1898, written by Henry James. As you can tell, he um, was born in the 1800s but passed away in the 1900s. He was born in the U.S. with British sensibilities, since he traveled abroad and spent the bulk of his time in England. So let's go over plot for a second. And again, we talked about how plot is not important, summary is not important, rather analysis is important. But if we don't know what the story's about, then you're just not going to be able to, excuse me, to follow today. So the Turn of the Screw is a tale. It's a framed narrative, first of all. So perhaps we should explain what that is. A framed narrative is essentially a story within a story, right? So if Ms. Barber and I start telling you a story, that's the first layer of this tale. Once we're telling you the story, that's the story inside of the story. And usually frame narratives will return to that external frame, to Ms. Barber and me, if you will, um, at the end of the story. So this is a frame narrative, and we begin with with a number of people gathered around a fireplace, and they're telling stories. And one person says, "I have a great story," and it's a true story, and it happened to someone I knew very well. And once you get into the story, you learn that there's a governess. A governess is usually a young woman who is hired to become the house tutor, the house teacher for children. And she's also somewhat of their nanny and their caretaker. But the primary task of a governess is definitely to instruct in some way these young people. So when the governess shows up, she starts to see ghosts. She starts to see apparitions. And eventually she thinks that the apparitions are either trying to come after the children, or they're working with the children to create some sort of havoc. And she feels that it's up to her to save the kids and make a good impression on the children's uncle. And she's the one telling us the story. So if we're going to focus on the perspective of the speaker, the first problem we have with this story is, talk about ambiguity and level of difficulty. Who is the narrator? Is the narrator the person standing at the fireplace telling us the story of the governess? Or is the narrator the governess herself? Or is the story some outside voice, namely the person listening to the speaker at the fireplace telling us the story of the governess? If you're confused, then you should be. This is a story where the narrator is so difficult to pinpoint. In summary here, the text we read comes from a man who transcribed the story based on a document written in old faded ink he receives, and a story he hears from a man who knew the person who experienced the events firsthand. We should also know that the person who tells us the story might be in love with the governess. And that's important, because if you're in love with someone, that may cloud your judgment when you're telling that person's story. So who is the narrator? Whoever it is. Are they biased? Yes. Are they reliable? No. But it's the only narrator we have. So our job then is to identify and describe the details, diction, or syntax in the text that reveals the narrator's perspective. So here are some scenes from this work. And because we're talking about the longer work of fiction, even though Turn of the Screw is more of a novella, it's a little bit on the short side, we're not looking at close reading the way we do for, let's say, prose analysis in question 2. So we're trying to select scenes from the entire novel or novella. Okay, so let's see who our narrator is, and I'm focusing exclusively on the governess here as our narrator. um, let's see who she is early on in the text. She tells us, well, that I think, sorry for the typo there, well, that I think is what I came for, to be carried away. I'm rather easily carried away. She herself tells us this. So what does that detail tell us about the narrator? That she is someone who can easily be carried away. Just think about that for one moment. Then this governess, again, a governess who is easily carried away, sees two ghostly apparitions. And let's be clear, these are ghostly apparitions who are only viewed by her, even though sometimes there's other people around. I scarce know how to put my story into words that excuse me, I scarce know how to put my story into words that shall be a credible picture of my state of mind. But I was in these days literally able to find a joy in the extraordinary flight of heroism the occasion demanded of me. We were cut off. They're in the middle of the countryside in England. We were united in our danger. What are the words here that tell us something about this speaker's perspective? We'll think about that in a second. And then, Miss Barber, if you could read the last one, because I'm choking over here.
Sure. So after seeing a few more apparitions, escaping from the Sunday church services, we have this quote: tormented in the hall with the difficulties and obstacles, I remember sinking down at the foot of the staircase, suddenly collapsing there on the lowest step, and then with a revulsion, recalling that it was exactly where, more than a month before, in the darkness of the night, and just so bowed with evil things, I had seen the specter of the most horrible of women. Not
Right, good.
this makes me want to pick this book back.
Perfect. Thank you for saving me there from choking. If we highlight the important details from each of these three scenes from the three sections of the book, beginning, middle, and end that we've selected, I want us to look at this. I want us to look at, I'm rather easily carried away. I want us to look at, after she sees these ghostly apparitions, her admission that it's hard to put into words a credible picture of my state of mind. She's someone who can easily be carried away. She's someone who sees ghosts, and she's someone who's already starting to talk about her state of mind. And then we heard Ms. Barber's excitement over syntax about 3 minutes ago. I think that any of you who are already well trained, well versed in discussing syntax have to get excited about this quote here. Think about a young woman in the middle of the countryside seeing ghosts all over the house. They're not just far away, sometimes they're right in front of her. Seeing these children who may or may not be conspiring with the ghosts, having no one to turn to. She starts to, again, question her own state of mind. And then let's look at her syntax. This happens towards the end of the story. Look at how many times her thought process is interrupted, or how many times her thought process changes. There are tangents. Tormented, comma, in the hall, comma, with difficulties and obstacles, comma. I remember sinking down at the foot of the staircase, dash, suddenly collapsing there on the lowest step, and then, comma, with a revulsion, comma, recalling that it was exactly where, comma, more than a month before. What is happening? She is not speaking or thinking clearly. There is torment, there is fear, there is anxiety. At this moment, she's not sure whether she should run away, whether she should accuse the children, whether she is going crazy herself. But remember, something that another detail that she gave us in that middle one was she keeps talking about this occasion of heroism. Something that I should mention is she is given this job by the children's uncle, and she becomes infatuated with him, even though she only meets him once or twice for a brief conversation. But she wants to do a good job. She wants to impress him because she, again, finds him very attractive. So she wants to make sure that she does a good job for this person. What do these details tell us about the perspective of the speaker? We were told, Ms. Barber told us, that focusing on the narrator's perspective allows us to recognize their experience and to enhance our experience and interpretation of the text. So how are we impacted by this? Well, I think we should ask ourselves a series of questions. How does the presence of such an unreliable narrator impact our reading? Why would James create an atmosphere of doubt around his tale? Well, how do we have this narrator who is falling apart? How are we supposed to believe this story? How are we supposed to interpret and make sense of this tale if we can't even trust the person who's telling us the story? And how does this mystery or confusion relate to a central idea in the text? You know, what's important to realize is this isn't James's error, right? Henry James did not mess up. He didn't say, "Oh, I should have given students a more reliable narrator so they can have someone they can work with here." No, he's given us fodder by giving us such an unreliable narrator. He's given us great um, opportunities for interpretation and discussion when you talk about the ambiguities of what this speaker is presenting us and the layers of how we're receiving the information. Again, we're not getting it straight from her. She wrote it in a book. The book was given to a man. That man read from that book. Then the person who listened is the one actually retelling the story. It's like playing phone tag, right? Playing telephone. If I start with Miss Barber and I whisper something to her, by the time it gets all the way to Bolivia, it's going to be a completely different message. So why would Henry James have done this? That's our task, right? We have to try to connect this decision made by the writer to see how it connects to the central ideas in the text. But of course, this is not just true of the turn of the screw. We have a narrator or we have a speaker in everything we read. So this is where you come in and where you have to look at what you have done this year and try to put this into practice, where you examine the speaker and then you try to connect the way that the speaker was created to a central idea in the text.
And a lot of times, like we talked about yesterday, you see so many of these elements just, they can accomplish the same thing. And yesterday we talked about how events and plot added to suspense. And a lot of times when we have this unreliable narrator, different layers of unreliability and confusion, that also is a way that that the author adds to suspense. So when I think about novels and plays with this, another novella that first comes to mind, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I'm a Shirley Jackson huge fan. And this is dark, and we have this narrator as a child remembering and thinking in this very confusing time for her. And so it's automatically set up that we're seeing it through a very sheltered child's point of view in the most unusual circumstances. So we know everything may not be communicated. We may not be getting the clear picture of what's happening. Life of Pi is a novel that comes to mind. Atonement, Rebecca, several of these novels, and I'm sure you already have some ideas coming to mind. Actually, some of my favorite unreliable narrators come from short stories. And I know we're talking about works of longer fiction. But again, these skills apply to all kind of text. So I think about The Telltale Heart, and I love that because it opens and the narrator says, nervous, truly nervous? You think I'm nervous? Do you think I'm crazy? So anybody who their lead in line in a conversation with you is, do you think I'm crazy? Now let me tell you why I'm not crazy. I mean, that's setting us up to know, okay, this is going to be a wild ride with the narrator. And then, like Mr. Escobar was talking about, we see all this punctuation, dashes and question marks, and this real shattered type of thinking. So I think about that. The yellow wallpaper is another great example. But we want you to start populating a list. And again, thank you so much. I am going to put together a list. I had several emails yesterday, and I'm going to respond to those this afternoon, of all the different things that you're reading. And I'm going to make a list, and we will make that list available to you as we collect novels, because it's so great for us as teachers to see what everybody else is doing. But I want you to be thinking about what novels and plays are standing out in your mind now as Mr. Escobar talked through this. I'm sure you have some things. And then I want you to identify the narrator. How would you describe the narrator? And we're thinking, let's go back and think about that iceberg with the characterization. Here are the few things that we see. Now here are all of the things under the water level, beneath the surface, that still churn and make up this character and cause them to act and think in the way they do. And then finally, what's some specific scenes and some specific texts that you can find evidence of this? So we're wanting to start big and get small. So you can work on that. And tonight, well, wait, before we get to the homework and summary, let's review what we did. So we talked about how selection of details, diction, syntax, what do they reveal about a narrator or a speaker's perspective? And here are some of the questions that you can use to help this be a way in to the text for you. What's the narrator or speaker's tone toward a subject? How does their diction and syntax contribute to that tone? And this is exactly what Mr. Escobar showed us today. Maybe there are multiple tones. Then we really get into this complexity, like here, their selection of detail and syntax is showing one thing, and then it's a shift over here. Well, what does that mean? And why are they reacting differently there? So think about how the narrator and what they're saying, the way they are saying it, how does it add to the tone of the work? And also, how does it help us to make meaning of the text? How does it give us a broader context of what's happening in the text?
And it's important, I think, to think about speaker and narrator, and not just the characters in the text, right? So many times in a classroom setting, we discuss characters and we discuss, the plot and what's going on. But in addition to the homework assignment we're going to give you, maybe this is homework 2.0 here. Go through all the books, all the novels and plays that you have read. Do you remember who the narrator was? Do you remember who the storyteller was in each of those texts? And can you say something about that narrator or speaker? Can you answer some of these questions? It's a way for you to review the novels and plays you've read this year, but it's also a way for you to practice delving into the intricacies and ambiguities of someone other than the character or the protagonist and antagonist of a work of literature. So that might be good practice for you all tonight.
So tonight, this is the prompt that we are going to look at. It's the 2008 Form B prompt. In some works of literature, children and adolescents are portrayed as times graced by innocence and a sense of wonder. In other times, they are depicted as times of tribulation and terror. Focusing on a single novel or play, explain how its representation of childhood or adolescent shapes the meaning of the work as a whole. This time we've included a list of works that was given with this, but now's a good time to note, you can use examples from any text you've read. These texts are just examples in case something doesn't come to mind immediately. This might jar your memory. Actually, I really coach my students, just cover up that list and don't even look at it, because it's often a distraction, because if you don't see the first thing that pops into your mind on this, then you're like, oh no, that may be wrong. This is just to help you if you get stuck.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I do the same thing, Ms. Barber. I tell my students to cover the list. I actually tell them to cover the list and then write down all of our texts, select the one that they want to use, and then to refer to the list in case they forgot a title.
mhm.
And you know, you said this is meant to jar your memory, to help you recall something you may have forgotten. And I think that's how it's a useful tool. I like that the list exists, but I like it after students have already considered a work on their own merits there.
And I'm sure just when I read this prompt, immediately things are coming to your mind. So, so go with those. And what we're going to ask you to do tonight is to write an introduction to this essay prompt. And within your introduction, highlight your thesis. Now, tomorrow we are going to shift and start talking about thesis statements. So this is really going to warm us up for tomorrow's work.
And I think it's preparation for the long range view that we have for these lessons. We've started with prompts and we've asked you to write claims, right? To just make assertions, bullet points even. And now you're getting a fuller view of the literal prompt. Now we're listing the titles at the bottom, and even our task for you, even though it's still not to do what the prompt is actually saying, you could tell that we're moving more towards essay writing. And that's exactly where we are driving or steering the ship, if you will. Don't worry, although I would like to assume that at this point, all of you have an idea of what the thesis should sound like and what the thesis should include. For now, there are no wrong answers, right? We're treating this as our classroom, and we haven't taught it yet. So all we want is for you to do the best job you can, try to develop an introduction, try to develop a thesis statement, and then tomorrow, in tomorrow's video, we're going to open with this, and we're going to talk about what possible thesis statements might look like, what they include. And you know, the truth of the matter is that a thesis statement can look uh, differently, right? I mean, if you have 10 students write 10 thesis statements, they're not going to be identical, not word for word. So we're going to talk about the major components that the thesis should include. But tonight, try your best, do a good job. We trust that you are doing this with great fidelity. Absolutely.
We are looking forward to spending the rest of the week with you. Thursday, talking about thesis statements. Friday, really jumping into line of reasoning and how do we develop that throughout the work. And that's going to finish the week for us. So thanks again for being with us today. Thanks for all of your feedback. That's been really helpful as well. Also, we are still just wanting to get this message out. If you know of anybody who doesn't have access to the internet or device, be sure to reach out to College Board. They are trying to work on this so everyone can take the exam with what they need. That we just want everybody to be able to have what they need to take the exam.
Absolutely. And if you've been tuning in to all the latest news surrounding the College Board and AP examination, we know that this Friday is going to be a very big day because a lot of your questions about the exam and exam dates and all those important topics will be covered. So if you have friends, if you have classmates out there who don't have access to the internet, please jot down the information and communicate it with them. We'd appreciate that so that your classmates are
We're waiting just like y'all.
aware.
We don't know either. So we are anxiously awaiting too.
Absolutely.
So Bear and I say goodbye. He's still sleeping. Another lesson, another nap for him. I'll be back tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Mr. Escobar will be back too. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Take care, everyone. Goodbye.